Good evening and welcome to Politics Nation. Tonight out of the windy city of Chicago. Tonight's lead V. V is for vindication and for vindictive. For Republicans wanting to turn the corner on the still unreleased Mueller report. President Trump has been happy to oblige them all week with a distracting victory lap, culminating in a return to the campaign trail where he spiked the football.
The Russia witch hunt was a plan by those who lost the election to try and illegally regain power by framing innocent Americans, many of them, they suffered with an elaborate hoax.
Folks, we still haven't seen a full, unmitigated copy of the report, save the 4 pages of summary that Attorney General Bill Barr released a week ago, and followed up Friday with the announcement that the report would be made public, redacted, of course, by mid-April, if not sooner, Barr's own language. Meanwhile, his boss maintains that no one wants the full report out more than him. Of course, that hasn't stopped him from threatening lawmakers who dared to support the investigation and the press that dared to report on it. And that brings me to my question tonight. With America still trying to make heads or tails of what the Mueller report is and what it might be, has the press and the public moved on too quickly, giving the president the freedom to do what he does best? Change the subject. Joining me now, David Brock, chairman of American Bridge 21st Century, Sophia Nelson, former House GOP committee counsel and a contributor to NBCThink.com, and Paul Butler, former federal prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst. Let me start with you, David. Many of us said that the candidates and others need to deal with the issues, but the Congress should stay on this report. Have we moved on too quickly? Because we really have only seen a 4-page summation by the Attorney General appointed by President Trump. We do not know what is in the report itself that is now over 300 pages, we're told.
Right. Well, I think the president got a couple of 2 days out of it, but Democrats are not going to move on. And the tell here was by the end of the week, Attorney General Barr was walking back what he had tried to do earlier in the week, which to my mind was a cover-up. He had a bias on the obstruction of justice issue going into it, and he tried to foist that upon the American public. He admitted by the end of the week that his letter wasn't a real summary. They still won't tell us exactly how many pages is here. So I think it would be a big mistake for Democrats to move on here. I think, and I'd predict that by the time we get the full report, which may be 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, there's going to be some devastating information in there on the obstruction of justice issue, because the president here stood to benefit he benefited from the underlying crimes on the computer hacking, and I think he used his executive power, and I think that's misused his executive power, and I think that's what Mueller concluded, and I think we'll see that. And so, no, it's not time to move on.
Paul, we did see in Attorney General Barr's 4-page letter that even he says that the report by Mueller seems to have said there was no collusion, but he could not say there was no obstruction of justice. Does that mean that we could see in the report, when we finally get it in a more complete form, that there could be things that are absolutely inappropriate and in some cases appalling, but may not have reached to a criminal level or a level where they felt they could prosecute?
That's right, Reverend. So we know that there is evidence of obstruction of justice by President Trump in the report. We know that because Mueller said that he could not exonerate Trump on obstruction. The question is, will we see it even when we get this redacted version? What the Attorney General has said is he's going to remove 4 categories of information, including grand jury material. Well, that's the investigation, and information about some third parties. I'm really curious about whether Donald Trump Jr. is a third party and whether that will be redacted from the report. There's a big mystery about why Mueller didn't indict Donald Trump Jr. since he appears to have lied to the House Intelligence Committee in the same way that Roger Stone and Michael Cohen lied to the committees and Mueller prosecuted them. There should be an explanation for why Don Jr. wasn't prosecuted. That's in that Mueller report. The American people must see that.
Sophia, what's missing to me on this is a complete lack of outrage that has been established that clearly the Russians, adversaries of this country, did in fact interfere with the American presidential election. You would have thought that the president and the attorney general would have shown some outrage and say that they want to move to make sure this does not happen in this upcoming election. It's almost like all trying to vindicate the president and not really be concerned about what this does to the democratic apparatus of this country.
Rev, I agree with you. Number one, and I think we've seen this consistently now since the election and then after the inauguration of this president, that this whole issue of whether or not Russia tried to interfere in our elections has been now established beyond a reasonable doubt, it seems to me, particularly given what the intel community has said, and now the Mueller report has clearly said, at least from what we know, the summary, that the Russians did, in fact, interfere in the elections. And, Rev, in a normal world, what we Americans are used to with all of our presidents, whether they be Democrats or Republicans, Obama or Bush, Daddy Bush or Reagan, what we're used to is a president that comes out and speaks to the American people and says, this will not stand. We will not allow the Russians to interfere in our elections without consequence. And here are the 10 things we're going to do. We've seen none of that. This president has hugged up to Putin. He has coddled him. He has been unwilling to do what he needs to do. Yeah, they've done some backhanded sanctions that went through the Senate that they were forced to do. But let's be honest, the response from the White House has not been what it should be, not what we expect, regardless of our party. And I think also, Rev, to agree with my colleagues, there's one simple way to deal with this Mueller report. As a former committee counsel on the Oversight Committee, it's simple. Congress under Article 1 has oversight power of the executive. They need to haul Mueller in. Forget about AG Barr. Haul Mueller in and ask him questions under oath. Ask him to speak to what's in the report. Ask him to give us the context. Ask him to explain why, if he couldn't exonerate the president, why didn't he then charge the president? These are the type of things that only Mueller, it seems to me, can answer, not Attorney General Barr.
It seems also, Paul, let me go back to you on this. We hear the president not committing to not giving pardons here. He's kind of danced around that. So he, in fact, has left the door open that he could pardon some of those that have been prosecuted by the Mueller investigation. And he's even said that they want to see the removal of Congressman Schiff over intelligence. And by removing Schiff, then who is going to look at the unredacted report by Mueller and see if what is removed is at so-called security problems are in fact security problems?
That's a great question, Reverend, because the national intelligence, national security component of the Mueller report, that's investigated not by the DOJ criminal prosecutors, but by national intelligence professionals who report to the president. So just like Trump ran the former Attorney General Sessions out of the Justice Department so he could hire somebody just like Bill Barr, who had apparently taken the loyalty pledge that Trump demands of his law enforcement officers and protected Trump from the obstruction investigation. It looks like Trump is trying to do that with the counterintelligence portion of the investigation as well. The only people who could not let him get away with that is the Congress. And that's why he's going after Schiff, because he knows the biggest threat to his presidency is in the hands of the Congress.
Now, Congressman Schiff, David, said this to my colleague Rachel Maddow when questions were raised. I want your reaction after I play this.
This report is all going to come out. And it's just going to reflect more poorly on the Attorney General if, when it does come out, and we look at the difference between what he redacted and what was under those redactions, it shows an effort to cover up or conceal.
Now, for him to raise that, he's the head of Intelligence Committee in the Congress, David, and for there now to be a target on him to get him removed, it's almost like you are going to give us people that you feel will redact what you want to redact, or at least not question what is redacted. So if that happens, we won't know if we're really seeing the full report that we could have seen when we do see it.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the Barr letter was intellectually dishonest. It was written in bad faith, and I don't think he's the right honest broker here to tell us what we can see and what we can't see. And I think that's what Schiff's point. And of course, that's why the focus is on Schiff. The conservatives say that Schiff is lying about collusion. He certainly isn't, because there was a number of incidents shown over these past 2 years that were collusion. All we know from Mueller is that it wasn't a criminal conspiracy, but there certainly was collusion. And it's very precious that the Republicans are attacking Schiff, because their president, you know, on average last year, lied 15 times a day. So this attack on Schiff is not going to hold water. It's ridiculous.
Let me go back to you on this quickly before we have to go on this segment anyway, Sophie. When you hear all of this, and you, as a Republican, you remember the Nixon resignation. It came because they established that he was part of the cover-up. Not that he had knowledge of the break-in and Watergate and who paid for it, but of the cover-up. So you could be guilty of obstruction even if the collusion was not proven. You could be guilty of obstructing or part of the cover-up. Will Republicans, if that is the case, when this report does come out, and if we're allowed to see really all of what needs to be seen in terms of the public, will there be Republicans that will go to this president and say, you obstructed, you need to resign, as Republicans went to Nixon and asked for his resignation?
Well, two things, Rev. Number one, I agree with my colleagues. I am appalled as a citizen of this great republic that we're being told what we can and cannot see when we're questioning truly whether or not the President of the United States was a mole for the Russians or under the influence of the Russians. Okay, we've apparently cleared him of that, and that's a good day for America when we clear him of that. But this obstruction issue is, as you say, correct. Of course, I don't remember Nixon being resigning. I was way too small at that point. But at the end of the day, your point is well taken that if obstruction is really on the table and you can't exonerate him of it, we've got a problem here, and we need to not only see that, but the Congress has to conduct its oversight responsibilities under Article 1. Now, whether or not do I think the Republicans will go to this president, I don't. I don't think that this is George Bush and Baker and Dole and those gentlemen back then who went to Nixon and said, you have to step down. This cannot be allowed. You have to go. I don't see this group of Republicans doing that, and that saddens me, but I don't.
All right, I'm going to thank Paul Butler. I'm asking David and Sophia to stick around for more. And of course, Sophia, I knew you were too small around Nixon. I meant you remember from your study. But coming up first, Donald Trump has injected a lot of noise into American politics. And next week's NAN conference will cut through the noise and focus on the real issues. One of the speakers at our convention joins me next. Be right back.